My wife demanded a divorce and the house. "You can't afford a lawyer to fight me," she said. I replied, "You're right." She served me papers in court, only to see the city's most feared, expensive attorney sit down next to me. He looked at her and said, "He doesn't have to afford me. I'm his older brother." My wife, Jessica, informed me last Tuesday that she wanted a divorce. There was no sadness in her eyes, no regret in her voice. It was a declaration of victory. We were sitting in the living room of the house we had spent 15 years turning into a home, watching our kids Andrew and Sophie play in the backyard through the window. She was speaking to me with the detached finality of a corporate executioner. "It's over, Matthew," she said, placing a thick file folder on the coffee table between us. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. These are my terms." I didn't open the folder. I didn't have to. She was more than happy to list her demands. She wanted the house that my parents had helped us buy with their life insurance money. She wanted primary custody of Andrew and Sophie. She wanted 70% of our savings and spousal support for a minimum of 5 years. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an unconditional surrender. When she finished, she leaned back with a smug, confident smirk on her face. "And I don't want to fight on this, Matthew," she said, her voice dripping with condescending pity. "Let's be realistic. You're a logistics coordinator, making $65,000 a year. I'm pulling in $240. You can't afford a real lawyer. My guy will bury you in legal fees before you even see the inside of a courtroom. It's better for you to just agree to the terms and walk away." I sat there looking at this woman I had loved, this woman I had built a life with, and I felt a profound sense of coldness settle over me. She didn't just want to leave me, she wanted to destroy me. She saw me as weak, as an obstacle to be crushed and discarded. Her biggest weapon, she thought, was my inability to fight back. The worst part was that somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that maybe she was right. Maybe I was weak. Maybe the man who went to work every day coordinating truck routes while she closed million-dollar pharmaceutical deals really was the lesser person in this relationship. Maybe I had been fooling myself all these years, thinking that being a good father and a steady provider meant something when measured against her corporate success. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment. Then I looked at her, my face a mask of resignation, and I said the 2 words she was expecting to hear. "You're right." The relief on her face was immediate. She had won. The humble logistics guy wasn't going to put up a fight. She stood up, smoothed her expensive skirt, and said, "Good. I'm glad you're being sensible about this. You'll be served with the official papers next week." Then she walked out of the room, probably to call her lawyer, with the good news. Here's what Jessica knew about me. She knew I was a man of modest means. She knew I didn't have tens of thousands of dollars to throw at a legal battle. She also knew I had a brother, an older brother named Nicholas. What she didn't know, and what she was banking on, was that Nicholas and I hadn't spoken in 5 years. Nicholas isn't a logistics coordinator. Nicholas is a shark. He is, without exaggeration, one of the most feared and expensive corporate litigation attorneys in the state. He's a legal predator whose name makes other lawyers nervous, and he was, for all intents and purposes, no longer a part of my life. We had a falling out after I turned down his offer to join his firm as a paralegal. He thought I was wasting my potential, settling for a dead-end job, when I could have been building something bigger. I told him I wanted a normal family life, not the 80-hour weeks and constant stress of his world. We had a bitter argument that ended with us on opposite sides of a canyon of stubborn pride. We hadn't spoken since. Jessica had witnessed the tail end of that fallout. She saw me as completely and permanently isolated from the only powerful person in my family. In her strategic calculation, my greatest potential asset was a dead one. She was wrong. For 3 days after her announcement, I was in a dark place. She was right about one thing. I couldn't afford to fight her, not on her terms. The thought of losing my home, my kids, everything I had worked for, was suffocating. Andrew kept asking me why Mom was being weird, and Sophie noticed that I barely touched my dinner. I found myself questioning every choice I'd made, every moment I'd chosen stability over ambition, every time I'd been content with enough, while Jessica reached for more. The internal voice that questioned my worth as a man grew louder each day. Was I really the failure she implied I was? Had I been so focused on being present for my children that I'd forgotten how to be the kind of man who commanded respect? The kind of man who could protect his family when it mattered most? But on the fourth day, I hit rock bottom, and from there was nowhere to go but up. I swallowed every ounce of my pride that had cost me my brother for 5 years. And I found his private cell phone number. My hand was shaking as I dialed. I expected it to go to voicemail or to be answered by a sharp-voiced assistant. But after 2 rings, a familiar deep voice answered. "Hello, Nicholas," I said, my own voice sounding weak and foreign to my ears. "It's Matthew." There was a long pause. For a moment, I thought he was going to hang up. "Matty," he finally said, using the old nickname that sounded strange after so many years. "What's wrong?" And it all came pouring out. I told him everything. I told him about Jessica's demands, her lawyer, her coldness. I told him about Andrew and Sophie, how she wanted to take them away from me, how they were confused and scared by the sudden tension in our house. And I told him her final arrogant taunt, "You can't afford a lawyer to fight me." Another long, heavy silence stretched between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The surprise was gone, replaced by something I hadn't heard in years. It was the sound of a protective older brother. It was the sound of steel. "She said what?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. I repeated her words. "Okay," he said. "When and where is the first court appearance?" "Next Tuesday at the downtown courthouse," I told him. "I'll clear my schedule," he said. "Don't talk to her. Don't talk to her lawyer. Don't sign anything. Just show up on Tuesday. I'll meet you there." We hung up. I sat there, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and hope. Jessica thought she had disarmed me. She had no idea she had just handed me a nuclear weapon. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about what family really means. The morning of the preliminary hearing was a miserable, rainy Tuesday. It felt appropriate. I walked into the courthouse alone, feeling every bit the part of the defeated man Jessica expected me to be. I was wearing my best and only suit, the one I usually reserve for parent-teacher conferences and funerals. It felt like a bit of both. I had left Andrew and Sophie with my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, telling them I had an important meeting. Andrew, being 12 and perceptive, kept asking if everything was okay. Sophie just hugged me extra tight before I left, as if she sensed something was wrong. The weight of their innocent trust made my chest tight with determination. I entered the designated courtroom, a sterile, impersonal room that smelled of old paper and anxiety. Jessica was already there, sitting at the plaintiff's table. She looked incredible in a sharp, dark blue power suit, her hair perfectly styled. She looked confident, smug, and ready for a corporate takeover. Next to her sat her lawyer, a man in his 50s with a self-satisfied smirk permanently affixed to his face. They were laughing quietly together as I walked in. She saw me, and her smile faltered for a second, replaced by a look of pity. She probably expected me to look more broken. I just met her gaze, my expression blank, and walked over to the defendant's table. I sat down, placed my old briefcase on the table, and waited. Her lawyer stood up and sauntered over. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice oozing condescension. "I'm glad to see you're here. I trust you've had time to review my client's very generous proposal. If you're prepared to sign today, we can make this quick and painless." "I'm waiting for my counsel," I said quietly. He actually chuckled. "Your counsel? Good luck with that. Let's not drag this out." He walked back to his table, probably to share the joke with Jessica. The bailiff called the court to order. The judge, a stern-looking woman, entered and took her seat. She looked down at the docket. "Caldwell versus Caldwell," she announced. "Are both parties present and represented?" Jessica's lawyer stood up confidently. "Yes, Your Honor. Alan Parker representing the plaintiff, Mrs. Jessica Caldwell." The judge looked at me. "And the defendant?" Before I could speak, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud. Every head in the room turned. Walking down the aisle was my brother, Nicholas Caldwell. He wasn't just wearing a suit. He was wearing armor tailored from what looked like spun midnight and pure intimidation. He moved with the predatory grace of a panther, his expensive leather briefcase swinging at his side. A wave of whispers rippled through the courtroom as other lawyers and court staff recognized him. His reputation preceded him like a storm front. He didn't look at anyone else. His eyes were fixed on me. He walked directly to my table, put a hand on my shoulder, and squeezed it gently. Then he sat down beside me, placing his gleaming briefcase on the table with a solid, definitive click. The sound echoed in the silent room like a gunshot. I looked over at Jessica. Her smug expression had been completely wiped from her face, replaced by a mask of utter horrified disbelief. Her jaw was slack, her eyes wide. She looked like she had just seen death itself walk in and sit down at the opposing table. Her lawyer looked even worse. The color had drained from his face, and his confident smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated terror. He knew exactly who my brother was. Nicholas leaned over to me, ignoring the rest of the room. "Sorry I'm late, little brother," he whispered, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. Traffic was hell. Then he straightened up, all business. He looked directly at the judge. "Nicholas Caldwell, Your Honor," he said, his voice a commanding baritone that filled the room. "Representing the defendant, Mr. Matthew Caldwell." The judge's eyebrows shot up. She knew the name. Everyone did. Then Nicholas turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, toward Jessica. He looked at her, then at her terrified lawyer, and he gave them a cold, predatory smile. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his voice dripping with mock politeness. Then he looked at Jessica again and delivered the line that shattered her entire world. "He doesn't have to afford me. I'm his older brother." The game had just changed. Jessica thought she was coming to a surrender. She had just walked into an ambush. Nicholas opened his briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of files, and the demolition began. He immediately rejected all of Jessica's initial demands, declared them predatory and filed in bad faith, and announced our intention to file a counter-petition. He said we would be seeking a full forensic audit of all marital assets and expenditures for the last 3 years, and that we would be demanding Jessica pay for all of my legal fees. Jessica's lawyer just stood there stammering. He was a minnow who had just been cornered by a great white shark. The battle was over before it even began. The 2 months following that first court appearance were a legal blitzkrieg. My brother Nicholas doesn't do things by halves. He doesn't just practice law. He wages war. Jessica and her lawyer thought they were going to roll over me. Instead, they found themselves on the receiving end of a relentless, systematic assault. The first thing Nicholas did was file a motion for discovery that was, by all accounts, a thing of terrible beauty. It wasn't a request. It was a demand for every single financial document Jessica had touched for the last 5 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, work expense reports, Venmo transactions, everything. Her lawyer filed a motion to have it dismissed as overly broad and harassing. The judge, who was clearly intimidated by my brother's reputation, took one look at Nicholas's justification and approved our motion in full. Jessica was legally obligated to turn over everything. She thought she was clever, that she had hidden her tracks. She had no idea she was dealing with a man who employed a team of forensic accountants for fun. While Jessica was drowning in paperwork, Nicholas went after her personally. He scheduled a series of depositions, not just with her, but with her closest friends, her family, and even a few of her colleagues. His strategy was simple: apply pressure from all sides until the truth was squeezed out. The breakthrough came during the deposition of Jessica's best friend, a woman named Melissa Porter. Melissa was fiercely loyal to Jessica, but she was no match for my brother. He was polite, charming, and utterly ruthless. For 3 hours, he questioned her about Jessica's spending habits, her work trips, her general happiness in our marriage. Then he asked the question that broke the case open. "Miss Porter," he said, "can you tell me about Mr. Brandon Holbrook?" I saw Melissa flinch. The name was unfamiliar to me. Nicholas just waited. Melissa tried to play dumb, but Nicholas produced a stack of credit card statements from a card I never knew Jessica had, a card linked to our joint savings account, an account she had been siphoning money from for over a year. He pointed to a series of charges: a hotel in the wine country, jewelry from a high-end boutique, expensive dinners for 2. Mrs. Caldwell was supposedly on work conferences on these dates, Nicholas said. But her employer has confirmed no such conferences existed. You were not with her. So I ask you again, who is Brandon Holbrook? Melissa broke. Under penalty of perjury, she admitted it. Brandon Holbrook was the man Jessica had been having an affair with for the last 18 months. He was a wealthy pharmaceutical company CEO she had met through her work connections. It all clicked into place. The secrecy, the financial demands, the confidence. She wasn't just leaving me. She was leaving me for someone else, using my money to fund her future with her, a wealthy lover. Her plan was to strip mine our marriage for assets to take with her into her new, upgraded life. The deposition of Brandon Holbrook himself was even more illuminating. He was a smug, arrogant man whose arrogance crumbled under Nicholas's relentless questioning. He admitted to the affair, admitted that he and Jessica had planned the divorce together, and even admitted that demanding the house and spousal support was his idea, telling her that I would be too poor and too weak to fight back. But Nicholas wasn't finished with him. Through meticulous questioning, he revealed that Brandon had been using company resources to facilitate the affair. Company credit cards for hotels, company cars for trips, even company time for their rendezvous. More damaging still, he had been sharing confidential pharmaceutical industry information with Jessica to help her close deals, creating a clear conflict of interest that violated multiple professional ethics codes. They had underestimated me. They had underestimated my family. With these depositions, Jessica's case wasn't just weakened, it was annihilated. She had committed perjury in her initial filings by claiming she was a faithful wife. She had hidden assets and spent marital funds on her affair. She was a liar and a fraud. But the real devastation came when Nicholas forwarded his findings to Brandon's board of directors and the pharmaceutical industry's ethics committee. Within a week, Brandon was fired from his CEO position for gross misconduct and professional ethics violations. His career in the industry was effectively over. Word travels fast in tight-knit professional circles, and no reputable company would touch him after such a scandal. The man who had encouraged Jessica to destroy me, who had told her I was too weak to fight back, found himself unemployed and unemployable almost overnight. His arrogance had cost him everything. Her lawyer called Nicholas begging to settle. Jessica was willing to drop all her demands and just walk away. Nicholas's reply was ice cold. No. Walking away is a privilege she hasn't earned. We're going to court, and we're going to make sure everyone knows exactly who she is. During this time, the strain on Andrew and Sophie was becoming more apparent. Andrew, always the more sensitive one, started having trouble sleeping. He would come to my room at night, asking if he was going to have to choose between mom and dad. Sophie, meanwhile, became clingy, following me around the house like she was afraid I might disappear. I tried to shield them from the details, but kids are perceptive. They knew their world was falling apart, and they were looking to me to somehow fix it. The weight of their trust, their need for stability, gave me strength I didn't know I had. One evening, as I was tucking Sophie into bed, she asked me the question that broke my heart. "Daddy, are you and Mommy getting divorced because I was bad?" I knelt down beside her bed, looking into those innocent eyes that looked so much like mine. "No, sweetheart. This has nothing to do with you or Andrew. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, but it's never, ever because of their children. You and your brother are the best things that ever happened to me." She seemed satisfied with that answer, but I could see the confusion and fear still lingering. That night, I made a promise to myself and to them. Whatever happened in court, I would do everything in my power to give them the stability they deserved. Jessica, meanwhile, was falling apart. The discovery process had exposed not just her affair, but her systematic deception over nearly 2 years. Friends and family members who had been deposed were distancing themselves from her, uncomfortable with being dragged into her web of lies. Her pharmaceutical company, learning of her relationship with Brandon and the information sharing that had helped her close deals, launched their own internal investigation. While she wasn't immediately fired, she was placed on administrative leave pending review, a move that effectively ended her chances of maintaining her high-paying position. Nicholas kept me informed of each development, and I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. This wasn't just about winning a case for him anymore. This was about protecting his nephew and niece, about restoring his little brother's dignity, about proving that family means something. The final court date was set for 6 months after that first hearing. As the date approached, Jessica's situation grew more desperate. She had lost her lover, who wanted nothing to do with a scandal that had cost him his career. She was facing the loss of her job, her reputation, and now, potentially, her children and financial security. The woman who had walked into that first hearing with such confidence was nowhere to be found. It has been 6 months since I first walked into that courtroom, a man who thought he had lost everything. Today I can tell you that I was wrong. I didn't lose anything that truly mattered. I gained it all back. The final court date was a formality. Faced with the mountain of evidence against her, the depositions, the forensic accounting reports, the proof of her affair, and her conspiracy to commit fraud, Jessica had no choice but to surrender completely. Her lawyer, looking tired and utterly defeated, advised her to accept any terms we offered, and the terms Nicholas drafted were severe but fair. Jessica didn't walk away with nothing, but she certainly didn't get the windfall she had planned. She was forced to relinquish any claim to primary custody. We now share 50-50 custody of Andrew and Sophie, exactly as it should be. Her demand for spousal support was dismissed with prejudice, and because Nicholas was able to prove that she had spent over $60,000 of marital assets on her affair, on hotels, gifts, and vacations with her lover. The judge ordered that amount to be deducted from her share of our savings and returned to me. She left the marriage with a small fraction of her original demands, a mountain of her own legal bills, and the public humiliation of having her entire scheme laid bare in a court of law. Her pharmaceutical company, after completing their investigation, terminated her employment for ethics violations related to her relationship with Brandon. The fallout in her personal life was just as devastating. Brandon, faced with the legal and social consequences of his actions, had dumped her almost immediately after losing his position. He was a man attracted to power and success, and Jessica had just suffered a spectacular public defeat. Her friends, many of whom had been forced to testify about her lies under oath, distanced themselves from her. She lost her fiancé, her house, her savings, her job, and her reputation, all in one fell swoop. All because she underestimated the quiet man she was married to. But the real story, the most important part of this whole chapter, is what happened with my brother. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Nicholas called me. "Meet me at Dad's old fishing spot," he said. We drove out to the lake where our father used to take us as kids, about an hour outside the city. It was the same weathered dock, the same view across the water that seemed to stretch on forever. We sat on the edge like we used to, our legs dangling over the water, watching the sunset reflect off the surface in ripples of gold and orange. We didn't talk about the case. We didn't talk about Jessica. We talked about Andrew's little league games, how he had finally learned to hit a curveball. We talked about Sophie's piano recitals and how she always looked for us in the audience before she started playing. We talked about how proud Dad would have been of his grandkids, how Mom would have spoiled them rotten. Finally, after a long, comfortable silence, he looked at me. "I was wrong, Maddie," he said, using the childhood nickname that suddenly didn't sound strange anymore. I was so focused on what I thought success looked like that I forgot what actually matters. You built something real, a family, a life worth protecting. I was an ass for not seeing that. I was stubborn too, I admitted. I should have called sooner. Should have swallowed my pride years ago. Pride, he said, shaking his head. Funny how it can keep you from the people who matter most. We sat there as the sun disappeared behind the trees, and I realized that Jessica's attempt to destroy me had given me back the most important thing I had lost, my brother. "You know what the ironic thing is?" Nicholas said. "She was right about one thing. You couldn't afford a lawyer like me, but she was wrong about everything else. She thought she was isolating you, but she just reminded me what family actually means." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I'd been carrying for 5 years. Over the following months, Nicholas became a regular part of our lives again. He showed up to Andrew's games, sat through Sophie's recitals, and even helped me teach them how to fish at Dad's old spot. The kids, who had been dealing with the trauma of their parents' divorce, found stability in the presence of their uncle, who had suddenly reappeared in their lives. Andrew, perceptive as always, asked me one day why Uncle Nicholas had been gone for so long. I told him that sometimes adults make mistakes, and it takes courage to admit when you're wrong. He seemed to understand. Sophie just enjoyed having another adult who would listen to her stories and play her made-up games without getting impatient. Jessica's parting shot to me was that I couldn't afford a lawyer. Her greed, her arrogance, her belief that I was weak and alone, that was the very thing that forced me to swallow my pride and make the call that brought my brother back into my life. She thought she was isolating me. Instead, she reunited me with the most important family I have. She tried to leave me with nothing. But as I stand here today, with my kids safe and happy, my home secure, and my brother by my side, I realize I have everything that truly matters. Sometimes the people who try to tear you down end up building you back up stronger than before. Jessica gave me the greatest gift she possibly could have. She gave me my brother back, and that's worth more than any divorce settlement could ever be.